Absolutely. Isn't that exciting? By our count, we have added 11 new members to the church membership this year. And to almost quote City Slickers, the year ain't over yet. So if there's anybody in here who has questions or you want to talk about membership, we're going to have plenty more opportunities. I would encourage anybody and everybody who's not already a member, but you know this is your church and you want to talk about plugging in here. Let's talk about some church membership, okay? As we move into the text today, I just want to say, first of all, I hope everybody has had a really, really great week. All right? Has everybody had a great week? All right. Maybe a mixed reaction there. I was actually expecting a mixed reaction. Listen, in all seriousness, I know better than to think that every single person in here had a great week. All right, just the law of odds, and then I know about human experience, and I know how things are. I know better than to think everybody in here would have had what I would call a great week. I just want to personally acknowledge that many of you have had difficult weeks, and I know this. I've talked to many of you. I know many of you are going through issues. I know many of you are going through hardships. I know there's health issues, health concerns. Whether it's yourself or a loved one, a spouse, something along those lines. I know that this is going on right now in the life of this church, and this is prevalent with a number of people right here in this church. Today, we're going to be touching on a subject that is going to speak right into that. And so I don't think this text could have really come up at a better time than the text that we're going to look at today. I want to ask the question, why does God allow us to endure pain, to endure hardships, to endure illnesses, to endure any kind of bump in the road, whether it be the death of a loved one or an illness in the family? I mean, doesn't He love us? Doesn't He love us? And if he does love us so much, and if He has the power to take away every hardship, then why doesn't He? These are the hard questions that we need to look at. Today we're going to be looking at some aspects of what I would call a healthy theology of suffering. Okay? A healthy theology of suffering. We're not going to be looking at this subject from every conceivable angle, but we are going to be looking at it from the perspective of, what does this text have to say today, speaking into our suffering? Because here's really the thing I want you to just really take in here. What I'm going to argue today is that the best time to build a healthy theology of suffering is before you go through a heavy period of suffering. That is going to be the best time to build that, because a strong faith will see you through difficult times. But a weak faith will betray you right in the middle of hard times. And I just need to stress that. We have to come to grips with this. You've probably heard the phrase, seeing is believing. Well, because of the guy that we're about to read about in a minute, I've titled this sermon, Believing is Seeing, because that's precisely what's about to happen. If you have your Bibles with you this morning, please just go ahead and let's go ahead and flip open to the Gospel of John, chapter 4. We're going to be resuming today where we left off at verse 46, and I will be reading down to verse 54. So if you're ready, let's read together. The text begins, "So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, 'Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe.' The official said to him, 'Sir, come down before my child dies.' Jesus said to him, 'Go, your son will live.' The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. Verse 52, so he asked them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. Today, again, we're looking at three aspects of a healthy theology of suffering, as we see in this text today. And here's the first one. And this is probably one of the hardest ones to come to grips with, if I can be honest. The first one is troubles and hardships will come for us all. We need to zero in on that now. Troubles and hardships will come for us all. Now, first of all, before we even begin really breaking this down in a large extent, I would argue that if we're going to really understand the magnitude of this story, if we're really going to understand what's at stake here and what's happening, we have to do everything we can to put ourselves into the shoes of this man who just came to Jesus with this problem. We need to feel his pain. We need to feel his desperation. We need to feel his anguish. And we need to feel what he's feeling. Because here's this man with this sick child at home. And this child is on the brink of death. And as a father, I'm just going to tell you, I cannot hardly think of anything worse to go through as a parent than to have a sick child at home that you are watching wither away, and he is on the brink of death. I cannot imagine what that must be like to go through that with a kid. I've never been close anywhere near anything like that in my life, thank God. The closest I ever came to anything even remotely like that was a little situation that took place several years ago, back when Ella was 3 years old. And I came home from work one day and found her sitting on the sofa, just very lethargic, just sitting there with this glazed over look on her face. Hardly responsive, really not talking much, really not answering questions, just kind of sitting there watching TV, but very lethargic. And when she would speak, what she would say was, my ankle hurts, my ankle hurts. And so, I'm checking her out, I'm examining her, and we're checking out the ankle. There's no injury, there's no wound, she hasn't fallen or anything like that. Why does her ankle hurt? Well, as I'm checking it out, I realized one of her ankles was like really, really hot. The one that was hurting. It was way hotter than the other one. And I'm like, Kelly, do you feel this? Do you feel how warm this ankle is? And I'll just kind of make a long story short here. We ended up having to take her to Children's Hospital, where they informed us that she had an infection in her ankle, in the bone. No idea how it got there. There was no injury, like I said. There was no cut. There was an infection inside her ankle, in the bone. And the infection was actually up against one of her growth plate in her leg. And so there was also this fear that depending on how far the infection spread or how bad it was, that she may not grow properly. Her leg may not grow properly. And so they needed to take her in the back and do an MRI and see how far this infection had spread. Now, we're already freaking out because we have this sick kid. And she's just barely even responding to our words. And so we know she's in pain. We know all this is going on. We're kind of freaked out already. And now they need to take her to do this MRI. Well, you know what 3-year-olds do not do? They do not lie still. All right, especially when you put them in an MRI machine. So the lady tells us, very matter-of-factly, that Ella was going to have to be put under general anesthesia. They were going to have to put her under so that they could run her through the MRI machine. Oh, and parents can't go back there. So imagine when all of this is going on, this 3-year-old is scared. She's having these issues, and you have to actually turn her over to these people. And so one of the hardest things I've ever had to do as a father is turn my 3-year-old over to this lady and send her in the back somewhere in the bowels of this hospital to be put under and then to go through this MRI machine all by herself without her mom and dad and wait, and we're not going to get to see her again for hours. That's the closest I've ever come to being able to know what this guy is going through. But let me tell you, the last thing you want to do as a father is be separated from your kid in a moment like that. But do you realize that's exactly what this royal official did in this story today? He left his child's side, his sick child's side, because he heard that Jesus was back in town. In verse 46, we read that Jesus is now returning to Cana. If you remember, Jesus has already been in Cana. Do you remember that story in chapter 2 when he turned the water into wine? So he's been traveling around, but now he's returning to Cana. And so it's completing what a lot of commentators refer to as the Cana cycle. And what they mean by that is this cycle that starts in Cana and then ends in Cana. And if you notice, each one of these two stories ends with a great sign, a great miracle that causes people to believe in Jesus. And there's this recurring theme of people having encounters with Jesus and coming to faith in him, or at least most of them come to faith in him. And they call this the Cana cycle. And Jesus, he's returning to Cana now. And he's there, and there's this royal official in the town of Capernaum, which is 25 miles away from Cana, 20 to 25 miles away. So apparently, since the time Jesus worked that first sign, word's gotten around about what he did. So when he comes back, word spreads again. Hey, that guy that turned the water into wine, he's back. And 25 miles away, this guy in Capernaum, this royal official, he would have been sort of like a high-ranking official in the court of King Herod Antipas, who was kind of like the ruler of that area. So he's a Jewish man, high-ranking official. He hears that Jesus is back in town, and he takes off. 25 miles. This would have been a journey of several hours, even on horseback. But he did the thing that no parent wants to do in that moment. He left his kid to stake it all on Jesus. He left. Can you imagine the guilt if that would have been when the kid died and you weren't even there because you were off looking for a miracle worker? But he leaves and he gets to Cana and he throws himself at Jesus' feet. And he said, "Come heal my son, come heal my son." Now, the ESV I just read says he asked him, but let's be honest, a more literal rendering would be he begged him, he pleaded with him. And the verb is continuous tense. In other words, it wasn't just a one-time, "Hey, can you come heal my boy?" It was more like a, "Please, please, 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 please." It was an ongoing thing. You can picture him begging, "Come heal my son, come heal my son, come heal my son." And let me say this too. We don't know much about this guy. I'll admit, we don't know very much about his backstory. But I'll say this. He's a caring father. He's a doting father. I feel like I can relate to him. And so in my book, he's a decent guy. Now, this is a decent guy. And he's not only a decent guy, but he's got this kid at home who apparently is a young child, because even though the text says son, when he asks Jesus to come heal him, the Greek word he uses strongly suggests that this is a young child. Right? So young children, generally pretty innocent. Correct? Generally pretty innocent. So we've got this pretty decent guy, we've got this innocent young child, but guess what? They're going through this incredible hardship, this incredible pain, this incredible illness that has all of them freaked out and nervous, and this boy's very life is at stake. So I don't think I need to work very hard up here behind this pulpit today to convince you that troubles and hardships are unavoidable. They're unavoidable. And we're going to go through them. Many of you are enduring really terrible times right now. Situations with health, situations with, just concerns, but mostly health. I've heard of a lot of health issues in this church lately. And you're going through it right now. And if you're not going through some sort of hardship right now, guess what? There's probably one coming sooner or later. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be the next day, but something is coming. You've endured some. You're going to endure more. And this is where a healthy theology of suffering comes in. And this is where a healthy theology of suffering begins. First of all, let me assure you, this does not necessarily mean that God is mad at you. Okay? If you're going through something, this does not mean God is mad at you. It does not necessarily have to mean that you've done something wrong. That's usually the first question people want to ask is, what did I do wrong? It doesn't, unless it's a direct punishment for a direct sin, it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It is part of the consequences of living in a world that is broken and fallen. And as often as not, we're victims to circumstances. But it does not mean God is angry with you. It does not mean God has forgotten about you and that he's on vacation or that he's abandoned you. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. This man that we just read about, this official, he was willing to stake it all on this Jesus guy. This guy that he doesn't even know. He's never met him. All he knows about Jesus is secondhand stories. He's heard rumors of water turned into wine from a town 25 miles away, and he's willing to stake it all on Jesus and trust him. By comparison, I would argue, we today, we know far more about Jesus, and we have far more reasons to trust him now than that guy did then. How much more should we be trusting in Jesus when we're going through the hard times? But the thing of it is, we need to be doing the mental work now. All right? We need to be working now to deepen our trust in him. Now. Not tomorrow, now. Because I'm just going to tell you this as a lifelong resident of New Orleans, except for that 10-month period after Katrina when I was way up north with the Yankees. But as a lifelong resident of New Orleans, I'm just going to tell you that when you're sitting in the middle of the hurricane, that is not the time to go checking to make sure you've got batteries and water. By the time that hurricane hits, you want that stuff already there. You want to have checked for that stuff before the hurricane hits, long before the hurricane hits. And you do not want to wait until you're in the middle of the struggle of your life to realize your faith is not as deep as you thought it was. That is not the time you want to find out your faith was not informed and your faith did not run deep. That is not the time you want your faith to leave you high and dry. Trouble and hardships, they are coming. When I preached Ephesians, and we did Ephesians chapter 6, and we talked about spiritual warfare, I believe in my heart of hearts, I made it quite clear that if you're a Christ follower, you've got a crosshairs painted on you, and Satan is coming for you, and he's going to use anything at his disposal to try to knock you down or wrong. And guess what? You're a target. A lot of the hardships we go through could very well be spiritual attacks. Troubles and hardships are coming. It is guaranteed. Jesus said, in this world, you will have troubles. He also said, take heart, I've overcome the world. But Jesus himself warned us that this was going to happen. I just want to encourage all of you to use the time you have between the storms to work on your trust relationship with Jesus. Strengthen it, shore it up, check for the batteries in the water. Use that time to develop a healthy theology of suffering so that when the next storm comes, because you know it will, when the next storm comes, you'll have that to fall back on. Sometimes it's not even the next storm. Sometimes it's just the back end of the first storm. If you've ever had the eye of a hurricane pass over you, there comes that moment where you think it's over, and then the second half starts. But use the time between the storms to work on your theology of suffering so that it will not leave you high and dry when you need it the most. And that leads us directly into our second aspect of a healthy theology of suffering, which is simply this: God will always do the best thing in the best way for the best outcome. That is something we can always bank on. God will do the best thing, the best way for the best outcome. So just kind of go with me here for a minute. Go with me. Your son is at home dying. He's dying. You have watched him wither away from this illness, from this fever, and he's on the brink of death. And in that moment, at the most desperate hour, you got up and you hightailed it 25 miles to another town, staking it all on this miracle worker, knowing you were taking a chance. You got there and you threw yourself at this man's feet and you begged and you pleaded with him, come heal my son, come heal my son, come heal my son. And then all you get from him, as we see in verses 48 through 50, is a simple statement: go, your son will live. Here's the question: are you, at that point, getting up and walking off? Think about it. Are you just getting up and walking off after all of that? Because here's the answer. Here's the answer. And it's a two-parter, and it's one of those answers that's going to stump on our toes a little bit. You will if you trust Jesus. If you trust Jesus, you will. If you trust Jesus, you're going to say, okay, it's a done deal. I'm up. I'm satisfied. It's the rest of us who struggle with the trust and who struggle with the faith who are going to be prone to say, whoa, you sure? I mean, that seemed too easy. That's all I get? That's all I get from you? Is just a line? Like, I don't think you get it. No, I really need you to come heal my son. You might be tempted to argue with him a little bit. You might be tempted to stress the severity of the situation. Like, no, there's got to be more to it than that. Go, your son will live. Are you serious? I just traveled 25 miles and you're not even going to come with me? You're just telling me my son's going to live? Like, how do you know my son's going to live? If your trust isn't all the way rooted, you're going to be tempted to argue, to reason, to do all these things. But if your trust is sure and solid, Jesus says, go, your son will live. You're like, all right, solid. And you get up and you go about your business, which is exactly what this guy did. Can you even imagine the level of trust he must have had at this point to take Jesus at his word with the very minimal information he had, that he took him at his word? But here's my follow-up question. Is this what the man wanted? Maybe. But is this what he asked for? What he asked for was for Jesus to come to his home and heal his son, remember? He wanted Jesus to come with him. He wanted to take Jesus back across the 25 miles back to his house. Like, Jesus, you're coming over. You're going to hang out with me today and you're going to heal my son. Why? Because if you're a first century Jew during this time period, your belief was that anybody who was a miracle worker or a sign worker, they needed to be present to do the miracle. So you wanted him to come with you. You wanted him to stand over your son. You possibly wanted him to lay hands on your son. You wanted him to lay eyes on your son. You wanted him to take more time with you and spend more time with you and come to your home and do this thing. The guy asked Jesus to come back with him. This was not at all his expectation that he was showing up to Jesus with. And actually, there's a lot in this story that defies the man's expectations. He probably wasn't expecting this to become the moment of a public teaching illustration that he was at the center of. He says, come heal my son. And Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. But fun fact, in Greek, the pronoun you can be singular or plural, depending on if you're talking to one person or a group of people. The pronoun here is plural, meaning Jesus is addressing multiple people. You know, it's at this point we tend to forget that everywhere Jesus went, he was like a modern day celebrity in the sense that the paparazzi was always there. Everywhere he went, there was a crowd. There were people following him like, hey, what's he going to do today? Jesus is using this moment to have this public teaching illustration for everybody for this man's sake. And he says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And so if you remember back in, I guess, the end of John chapter 2, there was this whole thing about all these people were following Jesus, but he would not entrust himself to man because he knew what was inside of man. And we talked about the fact that all these people were following Jesus just expecting to see a sign. And so you can imagine this crowd standing around the guy saying, ooh, I wonder what Jesus is going to do. And Jesus uses the opportunity to rebuke the crowd and say, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe. Now, there's a certain irony here because in about 5 seconds, the man is going to believe and then he's going to see. Everybody else, they have to see to believe. Jesus is going to commend this guy because he believes and then he sees. And later in the Gospels, he says, blessed are those who see. Blessed are those who believe who haven't seen. And so that's just an irony in this passage. But the guy probably wasn't expecting Jesus to use his moment of pain to teach a crowd. But that's precisely what he did here. And so all these things are going against this man's expectations. Nothing is turning out the way he thought. And so there's a lesson in that for us too. Because all he gets is a promise. That's it. A promise. Go, your son will live. That's it. But he believed. And because he believed, he was able to get up and go on his way. And so there's a message hidden in that. If you struggle with worries and anxieties and things like that, trust overcomes anxiety. Trust overcomes anxiety. Specifically, trust in Jesus overcomes anxiety. When your trust is solid and strong and your faith is solid and strong, you can make your request and you trust that he heard you. And you don't walk away with the same level of worry. Just like this guy gets up and he walks off with nothing more than a promise. But also, just like him, we have to be careful because he showed up to Jesus with these expectations. He showed up to Jesus with these thoughts. This is how I need Jesus to fix my problem. I need him to do this. I need him to stop what he's doing and come to my house. I need him to come lay hands and eyes on my son. He brought his expectations of how he thought Jesus needed to answer the prayer, and come to find out, Jesus was way, way above that. Jesus was able to fix his problem without any of that. Jesus, think about it. Jesus healed his son from 25 miles away at a word. Jesus exceeded the man's expectations. He exceeded them. But my point here is we need to be careful because that's the same thing we do often is we will too bring our request to Jesus, which we should, but we smuggle in the back door all of our expectations and all of our requests about how he's going to fix the issue. And we try to put all these parameters on him and we try to tell him how to fix the issue. And the simple fact is Jesus seldomly, if ever, performs within the tiny little box that we try to shove him in. Seldom, if ever, does he perform within that box. And this kind of reminds me of a situation I went through at work not terribly long ago. It was a situation, I work in the IT department at LSU, and I realized right away I'm about to have a big problem on my hands. Because I learned a long time ago, be very careful about using any illustration that deals with a computer, because some people are just, they don't want to hear about computer talk. Some people do not want to hear about computers. So I'm possibly stepping in some dangerous water here, even bringing up IT work, but I think I can do this without any technical language, okay? So even if you don't understand, pretend like you do and act like it's the most profound thing you've ever heard, all right? But seriously, no, this isn't that big of a deal. But it illustrates my point. I was at work and I had this project where there's this particular piece of software that I kind of managed that software. And that software was installed on a server. And I don't know if you know this, but computers get old and they need to be replaced. And so this server was about to be replaced. And so I needed to install the software on the new server. But the second part of that was there was all this data on the old server in a database that needed to be migrated over. All right, so hopefully you're still with me at this point. So this database needed to be migrated over. And I don't know databases. I'm not a database guy. I have no idea how that works. That's like magic to me. Even as an IT guy, there's some things I just don't go into. But I had no idea how this works. So luckily, we have a team of database guys at LSU and gals that do databases. And whenever we run into these situations, we ask for their help. And they come in and they help. So I had this database analysis administrator working with me. And so we sit down and he says, okay, so this is what I'm going to do. This, and this. And I'm like, whoa, buddy. That's not in my documentation. So my list says this, and this. I think you need to do this, and this. And he's like, well, I'm a database guy, and this is the best way to migrate that database over. And I'm like, why don't we hold off, and when we talk to the vendor, we'll straighten this out. So we had a call scheduled with the vendor that makes the software. So we get on the call, and we start going through the migration plan, and the database guy says what he wants to do, and the vendor's like, that's perfect. That's the best way to do it. Do that. And I'm sitting there on the phone, and it was at that moment that I knew I messed up, because here I was, George, what are you doing? I'm trying to tell this database guy, like, basically how to do his job, right? I think I know better than him how to migrate this database, and all I've got is my page of notes. Like, this is what this guy does. But I was a little bit embarrassed in the wake of it. I learned an important lesson in humility that day, because listen to the guy that's his expertise, right? Listen to him. And so I was a little bit embarrassed that I had been trying to micromanage this guy and tell him how to do this. And the reason I'm even bringing this up is because I think that is what we do to God a lot of the time with our prayer requests. Is we present the request, and then we also try to micromanage him, and we think we know the best way for him to go about with those requests. And I was kind of reflecting on this week, and I want you to think about the simplest appliance in your kitchen. All right, what is the simplest appliance in your kitchen? And I know this is going to get harder and harder for us to do in the future, because like everything is a smart appliance now. But for me, I can't think of anything more simple than a toaster. It's got to be the simplest thing in the kitchen, right? At this point, I don't know of any smart toasters. But if you needed to, could you fully explain how that toaster worked? I mean, could you fully explain it? Maybe one guy in the room. But to fully explain how, not just like in a general sense, but can you go into detail and describe why the toaster works the way that it does? Like, could you build a toaster if you needed to? I guess that's the question here. Could you build a toaster? So I would think for most of us, probably not. I know I'm not even close, right? So if I don't even know my way around a toaster, do I really want God to take instructions from me on every aspect of his job? Do I want him getting all of his input from me? Do I want him to do everything I ask him to do the exact same way I ask him to do it, in the exact manner I ask him? I think that would be a disaster. I don't know how a toaster works, but I think I'm going to presume to know how the universe should work, or how he should govern the universe. And so here's the point there. Our best bet. All right, and first of all, I don't want to discourage anybody from taking your request to God. That is not the point. And if that's what you heard just now, let me walk that back just a half inch here. Our best bet is to bring your requests to God. Lay it all at his feet. Every bit of it. Everything that is on your mind. Tell him what you want. Tell him what you need. Tell him what you think. Tell him how you would like him to do it. Do that. That's fine. That's great. Lay it all on him and at his feet. But then step back and trust him to take all of that and to do what is best in the ultimate sense. And that might mean that he does the heart of your request like you would like him to do, but maybe he just doesn't go about it the way that you thought he should do it. Lay it all at his feet, but then trust him to do what is best in the ultimate sense. And when you understand that, then we can start to come to grips with things like, God is not going to remove every hardship. He's not going to remove every one. He's not going to remove every difficulty. He's not going to remove every illness. He's not always going to do our favorite thing. Not always. Sometimes he will. Sometimes he will. Often he will. We just read a story where he healed a boy from 25 miles away. Sometimes he will, but not always. He will not always do that. But he will always do the best thing in the best way for the best ultimate outcome. We can bank on that. So if he ever denies your request, it can only be because there's something even better that he's going to do instead. even if we don't know what that is, even if we can't see what that is. This guy got up off of his knees and walked away in verse 50 with no tangible evidence that anything was different in his life. Do you realize that? It was not until the next day he found out that his son was better. He got up. Think about the anxiety with which he came to Jesus. And then he got up and walked away, content in his heart that he had been heard, but he had no evidence that anything was different. None. Not until the next day. All he had was the word of Jesus, but that was enough for him. Is it going to be enough for us too? That is the question. And then our third aspect of a healthy theology of suffering is that hardships are the fertilizer that grows our faith. Hardships are the fertilizer that grows our faith. I shared last week about my very piddling attempt at gardening way back in the day and how it didn't go well. And I would talk to people and I would ask them, like, why is my garden not growing? And I would get this consistent response, oh, you need to fertilize it. Here's what you get. And I got all these recommendations about all these different products, right? Miracle Grow, and then something with numbers in it, like 533 or something. I don't know. You gardening people can correct me. But there's all these different fertilizers. And they're like, you need to fertilize it, blah, 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 blah. Well, I tried fertilizing it, and it still died. Because apparently I really, really stink at gardening. Okay? So it still died. But why was everybody recommending fertilizer to me? Because everybody understands that these plants that are growing require nutrients. That it's not just water they soak up out of the ground. They soak up nutrients out of the ground too. And the fertilizer puts the nutrients in the ground. Ironically, and this is a tough pill for us to swallow. And as a guy who's been through all kinds of hardships in my life, I on the back end of a lot of them, I can look back now and acknowledge this. But ironically, hardships provide a fertilizer that nourishes our faith. We don't like that very much. I'll be honest with you. We don't like that very much. But hardships provide fertilizer that nourish our faith. And that is part of a very healthy theology of suffering, is to understand that. Am I saying you should be glad? Like, yay, things are terrible. I'm not going there. But I'm just saying at some point, with a healthy theology of suffering, we acknowledge that even hardships have their place. Even the hardships have their place. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. James says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." We see James linking even the idea of hardships with our faith. And he says that the hardship tests the faith and shows it to be genuine. He says it develops steadfastness. And he even goes as far as to say, like, without that, you're not a complete person. There are aspects, this is hard to deal with, but there are aspects of our characters and our well-being that without going through hardships from time to time would be underdeveloped, and we would not be complete people. Romans chapter 5, verses 3 through 5, Paul says, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings. Paul says we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And Paul has created this entire daisy chain of the role of hardships in our life and how it develops aspects of our character that just would not exist. They would be atrophied if they weren't tested from time to time. If you never use your legs and you sit down in a chair every day for years and years and years, your legs wither away. Hardships are a way of growing the muscles of our faith. Doesn't mean we're always happy about it, but they do play a role. They do play a part. And so we kind of see this message consistently throughout the New Testament of the role of trials and tribulations. Think about a child. Think about a young child who never hears the word no. Everything they ask for from mom or dad just gives it to them. They never have to work for anything. They never have to put in any effort. Can I have $10? Here's $10. Can I have a car? Here's a car. Can you do this? Yes. Can we not do that? No. Just everything the child wants, they get immediately. Their entire lives. They never have to work for anything. They never hear the word no. Can you think of any adjectives that are going to describe what that child is going to develop into after several years? I can think of a few. I heard spoiled. I was thinking another good one could be precocious. There's a bunch of words we could come up with. Nobody wants to be around those kids that never hear the word no. Nobody wants to be around those kids. Do you realize if God always gave us everything we want, when we want, how we want, the way that we want, at the time that we want, and he never said no, and he never made us work for anything, we would be that precocious little child? Do you realize that? I would not wish that upon anybody. I'm sure at this moment, this man did not appreciate the illness that his son had to endure. Nobody was appreciating this. The man surely wasn't. The man was freaked out. The kid was at home dying. Nobody was having a good time in this story. Nobody was having a good time. But look at verse 51. Watch this. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. And so in the midst of all of this pain, Jesus shines a miracle right into the darkness. And the kid is healed. And it's a beautiful moment. And it proves Jesus is exactly who he says he is. He healed this kid from 25 miles away. But let me ask you this question. Don't answer it out loud. You can shake your head if you want. But is this the best thing Jesus did for the kid in this story? Is this the best thing Jesus did for this kid in this text today? Noodle over that for 1 second. And then let me read verses 52 and 53. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better. And they said to him, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, your son will live. And watch this. And he himself believed, and all his household. See, it went from great to better. It went from better to best. It went from really cool to like really, really, really cool. As great as what Jesus did in verse 51 was, verses 52 and 53 top that 1,000 times over. That's the best thing Jesus did for the official son in this story. Not the healing of the illness, but the healing of his real illness, which was his separation from God. At the end of the story, we see that the illness and the recovery from the illness actually leads to the entire family coming to faith. God used this horrible illness to bring an entire family to faith. The weirdest thing about our hardships is we never know what great things God is going to spin that into. There's just no way to predict it. We're in the middle of these desperate times, and we're hurting, and the pain is real. And then God turns around and he works wonders out of the ashes of that pain. And so, yeah, the kid got healed, great. But you know what? Compared to hell and compared to eternal separation from God, that kid's illness was a cakewalk. Compared to what was really facing that kid, if he never found faith in Jesus, what he was going through was nothing. Whatever he was suffering was way better than eternity in hell. I can promise you that. And I can speak for myself when I say I would rather suffer just about anything this world can throw at me than suffer in eternity without God and in eternity without Jesus in hell. I would much rather that. And so if you're wise, so would you. So even in the midst of that pain, God does amazing things. But please don't overlook the fact that some of the worst situations, some of the worst diseases, some of the worst illnesses, some of the worst misfortunes are actually fertilizer that grows people into some of the strongest faith warriors you will ever find. Some of the mightiest Christians you know are probably people who relied on their faith and it pulled them through very difficult times. And on the other end of that, because of their faith pulling them through it, they came out the other end so much stronger. So much stronger. The history of our church, not Gretna, but the Christian church through the ages is filled with martyrs and people who have been persecuted for their faith, who did it with joy and just gladness. So the point is, the worst thing this world can throw at us, God has a way of spinning those things around and doing great things. The worst this world can throw at us is nothing compared to the goodness God can bring about. And so here's really the takeaways. Hardships will come, pain will come, sickness and illness will come. And it doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong, and it doesn't mean God has abandoned you. It doesn't mean God has forgotten you, or that God doesn't care about you anymore. It just means we live in a broken world where these things happen. And that's just the reality of the situation. The Apostle Paul, he had a hardship. He had a big hardship, and he prayed. He prayed several times. He asked God over and over to remove the hardship. And God answered his prayer, but he did not take away the hardship. Paul, mind you, we read about this in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 8 through 10. Paul says, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, and this is the Lord speaking to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And then Paul continues, therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. And yet, God knows infinitely more than we do. God knows all the possibilities. God knows all the outcomes. God knows if I do this for him today, this will happen. But if I do this, that'll happen. God understands how all those things are interwoven. And he knows the path to get to the best possible outcome. And he knows exactly what he needs to do to bring about the best possible outcome. And he alone knows the best possible outcome. So the question is, when he allows us to endure pain, the trick, again, is maintaining the trust that God will always do the best thing, the best way, for the best possible outcome. And the question comes, can we do that? Can we even trust him when we can't see what's happening behind the curtain? But even in that, we've seen that these hardships are actually the fertilizer that will grow a healthy faith. If we turn them over to the Lord appropriately, they're actually fertilizer that will grow our faith. In the book of Genesis, we read this. Joseph, towards the end of the book of Genesis, he was betrayed, he was sold into slavery, he was accused falsely of rape, he was imprisoned, he was forgotten, he was abandoned. And in the moment, I'm sure that was not a fun experience. But God positioned him in such a way that he was able to save millions of lives. And at the end of Joseph's life, he was able to look back and say, everything these people meant for evil, God meant for good. And God used all that hardship and did this amazing thing. And then the final thing I just want to remind you is that even as we're going through those hardships, one thing we saw clearly in this story today is that Jesus was there. Jesus was there. God walks with us. Jesus walks with us. And so, again, the man had no idea. He had no idea. He had no tangible evidence that anything was different after he talked to Jesus. But he trusted him. And he got up and he walked away, a happy man, believing that his son was healed, and his faith was vindicated. He received word the next day that his son was healed. And that's the other thing about our trials and our tribulations is no matter how hopeless it seems, no matter how bad it gets, we're never more than just like one step away from God doing something amazing and just healing it. You might blink and God did this amazing thing and he healed something that you never would have even imagined could be done. And so we live in the light of this hope and this faith that at any moment he very well might just say, you know what, now's the time. You learned what you needed to learn. Here's the healing. But throughout all of that, the overarching question for us is, are we going to trust him to do what is best in every given situation? Because remember, a strong faith will get you through those hard times, but a weak faith will betray you right in the middle of those hard times. Even in the worst of times, God will walk with you. You need to be walking with him. Would you pray with me?